Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, 7 weeks into the new fiscal year, and the state of Pennsylvania does not have a budget. Hold it, a complete budget. Joining me for a special interview is the governor of the state of Pennsylvania, Edward G. Rendell, and he'll be with us following these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, joining me, as actually often is the case, is the governor of Pennsylvania, who's sitting across from me and sometimes host of this show. Now, Governor, before we get into a whole bunch of serious topics, you've lost a lot of weight. You and I both know that obesity is a serious problem in driving up health care costs. First of all, congratulations. You look great. This is an important thing for you to do. How'd you get the will? Everybody knows you love food.
It's interesting. You know, I always exercise. When I was heavy, I exercised 6 days a week, and I haven't stopped that regimen. But what I've done is pretty simple, Terry. I eat about half of what I used to eat.
Right.
So if at dinner I would have eaten 4 lamb chops, I eat 2. And I literally carve everything in half of what I eat. I went out to dinner a week ago Friday, and I got a rack of ribs. I ate the half rack, and I took the half rack home and gave it to one of the troopers. And that's the easiest way to lose weight.
What about sugar? I mean,
well, I've tried to stay away from sugar and stay away from most carbohydrates. I'm not a slave to that. But folks have to understand a couple of things. One, I was afraid I'd be hungry if I reduced my intake by 50%. Your stomach shrinks, and you're not hungry. It adjusts to what you eat on a normal basis. 2, I thought I'd miss the fun of food, because I used to love to eat. You still get the fun of food eating 50%.
Sure.
You know, if you like a foot-long sandwich from Subway, you have a 6-inch sandwich from Subway. You still enjoy it.
Right.
So people say, well, it's impossible. I can't do that. I'll be hungry all the time, or I'll miss this.
Yeah.
Try it. And you're right about obesity.
This is an important health care issue.
When I became governor, we, for the first time, made our state employees contribute to their health care, because we had to. But we also gave them an incentive. They could take half of the premium they pay and not pay it if they met certain health goals, and reducing obesity was one of those health goals.
Well, we're going to move on. I want to ask you we have a bunch of topics I want to cover, but this is an important, and I think employers on these wellness programs, we do a lot of health care programs. Wellness is
you want to cut costs?
Yeah.
Wellness and prevention is the way to do it.
All right, I want to ask you about this, a couple of things before we get to the budget, this Joe Sestak Oral Inspector contest. First of all, I don't remember a Senate race. Governor's races, yes, A, starting this early, and B, it's certainly taken a turn with each of them sniping at each other, and I know you're a big Oral Inspector fan. The Democratic establishment, from the president to the vice president to our other senator and you. I mean, how do you think this is going to go? Do you think this is good? The sniping, the policy, I understand.
Well, the sniping is never good. It's one of the things I hate about politics is the sniping and the personal attacks. They're both good men. I liked Oral Inspector when he was a Republican. I thought he did a great job for Pennsylvania. I'm glad he became a Democrat, because that's where I think ideologically
Well, you urged him. You were one of the people.
But he ideologically always belonged in the Democratic Party. I regret that Joe Sestak is running for Senate, because he's not going to be in the Congress anymore. I think he is going to lose, and he's going to lose a certain congressional seat. And Joe is emerging in the Congress as a real leader, as a good, solid, moderate, middle-of-the-road Democrat. But they're both good men. But Oral Inspector's done a great job protecting the interests of Pennsylvanians. And it's interesting. He did it in a nonpartisan way. We've been arranging these calls with Democratic chairmen in the small counties and Democratic county commissioners. And every one of them knows Arlen, because Arlen did something for them when he came around to there. He goes to every one of the counties, all 67 counties, every year. And our Democrats knew him even when he was a Republican. He did stuff for them.
Sestak is a bulldog. I don't know anybody that did 67 counties before they announced. I know you've been all over this state a zillion times. 67 counties before he officially announced.
But Oral Inspector's been doing that for 30 years.
That's true.
30 years.
That is true. At any rate, let's move on. I just wanted to get. I want to talk before we get into the budget about health care. Look, there is no doubt about it. This health care debate may well define the Obama presidency. So let's start with that. The other thing is, it is truly personal with people. I don't care whether you're a conservative and you go to these meetings because folks have sent you emails and say go, 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 or now liberals organizing as well. This is very personal. Do you think the president, first of all, has sent to Congress, go do it? Why didn't he go and say, here's a list of things, and be more engaged in that process?
Terry,
I don't understand that.
You're exactly right, and that's what happened to the stimulus. It's why the stimulus, which is still a positive for the nation, isn't as good a bill as it could have been. The president decided, and his folks decided, that they were going to let the Congress shape these bills. And as a result, no one on our side has any clear idea of what's in this bill. When people hear public option, well, they know that we need competition, because we don't have competition in Pennsylvania, and that's one of the reasons our prices are so high, but they don't know what public option is. And the first thing the president should have drummed in, and he tried to do this, is we can't accept the status quo. Listen to this just for a second, Terry. Healthcare inflation in the last 7 years has gone up 75%, while regular inflation 17%. 560,000 Pennsylvanians have lost employer-based health care in the last 6 years. And last year, 1.2 million Pennsylvanians were without health care. That's 10% of the state. And there are many people who have health care, but as soon as they get sick, their company drops them.
Or they're paying higher deductibles.
Or if they move jobs, they can't take their health care with them. Or if they happen to be sick, they can't get health care. So job number one is convince people that we can't have the status quo. Job number two is set out 4 or 5 basic principles. The president should say, this is what I'm for, and let's get this done.
Yeah, let me, we're going to have to run to a break, but here's what I thought. Look, we have Medicaid, right? Inefficient waste, we could clean that up. Hold on. Why didn't we just say, increase the income threshold for Medicare?
Well, that's one of the plans.
Hold on. Why didn't we say Medicare, instead of 65 or 66, let's go to 50? We have the Bureau clean up the waste and the fraud and the inefficiency.
Interestingly, there's waste and fraud in those government programs, but in Medicaid, the administrative costs for the program are 1/3 of what the costs are for the private insurers. 1/3, because the private insurers build in all their profit on the administrative side. So you're absolutely right. And by the way, the House plan does raise the threshold on Medicaid.
I think we're running to break. I think this could have been done.
Much more
covering
simply.
more people, get a big bunch of them covered with the current programs, just change them, reform them. You'd have gotten savings out of them that could have paid for the increased coverage.
No question.
I get the final word in this segment. We'll be back with Governor Rendell.
No
following
question,
these
you're
words.
correct.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by PAConstructionJobs.com. For more information about rewarding careers in the highway construction industry, visit PAConstructionJobs.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers with my special guest, the Governor of Pennsylvania, Edward G. Rendell. Governor, let's turn now. First of all, I think you're right about this. I don't want to keep going this healthcare business. But
that's important.
It's 1/6 of the economy, as you know, and it's a huge part of the Pennsylvania budget. Medicaid is now, second only to education in state spending. So everyone needs to be concerned about, along with education and Medicaid and corrections. Are they the 3 biggest?
3 biggest, and almost all of them are mandated. Almost all of them are mandated, meaning we don't have any discretion about what to spend in each category. But you're also extremely right. But the answer is, as you said it right before we went to break, we've got to find ways to reduce costs. If we don't reduce costs, we're sunk.
Yep. Well, everybody agrees. All right. Let's talk about the subject. 7 weeks into, we don't have a complete budget. We got the budget the bridge budget that you blue-lined and took out and signed, right?
But that's not a real budget.
That's not a real budget. We all agree. And there are a lot of people being hurt now that shouldn't be hurt. Everybody agrees. Explain this to me. We are not arguably, you say, and the Republicans say, $1 billion apart. Is this, yes?
Probably a little more. Probably, they haven't agreed to even revenue increases that are popular, that the polls show are overwhelmingly popular. So I'd say, you can honestly say we're about $1.6 billion apart.
Okay, you're $1.6 billion apart. What I don't understand, and maybe you can help me out and help our viewers out, this ought to be doable. This ought to be, is it this tough to get everybody in a room? That conference committee, was beyond an embarrassment. You said it. Even Senator Pledgy said it was a mistake.
Well, first of all, mistake one, we started too late. On March 25th, February 25th, I sent a letter to every one of the caucus leaders, and I said, let's start in March. Let's get this done March, April, May. Basically, that letter was ignored. We started the last 2 weeks in June like we always did. That was mistake number one. Mistake number two is we staked out ideological positions without knowing the scope of the problem. This problem, Terry, is enormous. We lost $3.25 billion of revenue last year. This year, we're starting from a much lower revenue plateau, so we've really got a $4 or $5 billion problem to make up. Now, we need to do it two ways. We can't do an all-cut budget. If you did an all-cut budget, you would strip $1 billion away from education, public education. You saw the report that came out earlier this week. Pennsylvania, #1 state in the nation in the last 6 years in educational improvement. We can't go back now. You would throw 12,000 kids off of medical care. We're not going to do that. At least I'm not going to do that. I don't care if my popularity rating goes to 5%. I am not going to do that. Plain and simple as that. So we have to make cuts, and we've made almost $2.5 billion worth of cuts. Now's the time to raise reasonable revenue. We're the only state in the union that doesn't tax cigars and smokeless tobacco. It's time for us to do that. The public supports it.
That's certainly not unpopular.
Raising the cigarette tax, taxing the extraction from the Marcellus Shale. But in addition to that, we need some bigger items, because it's not just this year that's the problem. When you do budgeting, if you do it right, you look down the road. We could, by using a lot of one-time gimmicks, we could possibly do a budget that would balance this year without much pain. But it would leave us a $2.5 or $3 billion hole for next year.
Your point is that, and I've made this argument, this is really not about this year. If this were about this year, you guys could do this in 20 minutes.
Absolutely.
This is about next year and maybe the following year,
when the stimulus money goes away.
Yeah.
So I've said to the Senate Republicans, I said, guys, a lot of the cuts we've made are painful. I cut Classrooms of the Future, a program that's nationally heralded.
I know, you've cut a lot of programs
that I love,
right. I understand.
So it's time for them to share the pain, and that means we've got to go to the taxpayers and say, look, we've made the cuts we can make, but we still need to raise revenue. Of the 40 states that had budget problems, 33 of them raised revenue. We have to raise revenue, too. Now, let's find the least onerous way to do it. I thought the personal income tax, which would have been 70 cents a day for the average wage earner, was the best way to do it. But everyone said, take it off the table, Governor. Senator Pledgy said, take it off the table and we'll have a budget in 10 days.
Yeah, well, you don't.
I took it off the table and it's 2 weeks now and there's no budget.
All right, we're going to break. We're going to pay some bills, something that the state of Pennsylvania has to do. Back with the governor in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. I'm chatting with Governor Rendell. We're talking about the state budget. If you just joined us, 7 weeks, no complete budget. Governor Rendell has been going around the state making his case. Senate Republicans and House Republicans have been making their case. It seems like the two sides are no close.
Well, we got 50% of the House Republicans voted against Senate Bill 850. Yeah. So even they recognize we have to have revenue.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this question. One of the proposals that, obviously, this past week they've tried to override your budget, a line item budget. By the way, only one time in the history of the state has that been done. Milton Schaap was the only governor that had a line item. It didn't happen. But let's talk about, you want 300, you're down to $300 million in your education budget, is that correct?
Yeah, $300 million
increase. To help, increase. And is that the bottom line for you? Are you going any lower?
Well, I'm not going any lower on education. I've told them I'm not going any lower on health care. But
two things, right?
We've made, as I said, $2.4 billion in cuts. Could I squeeze out another $100 million? Possibly. But that's it. There's nothing left to cut, because most of what we do, Terry, corrections, healthcare, and education, most of those things are mandated by law. Or the stimulus bill requires us to fund, if we want the stimulus money, at a certain level. So there's nothing more to cut. Now, we've got to look for recurring revenue that will be here this year, next year, and the following year. Nobody liked my increase to the personal income tax. Raising the sales tax itself, the public likes that a little better, but I don't think there's much of a consensus behind it. But we can do this by eliminating some of the sales tax exemptions. Some of those exemptions make no sense, and they're all just the special interest. So I'll give you an example. Do you have a cell phone?
Of course I do.
Take out your cell phone.
It's not. I'm not allowed to have it on the
I'll
set.
take out
Governor
mine.
can have a
Mine's
cell
on
phone. Can have a cell phone on the set.
You pay sales tax on your cell phone bill, but you don't pay sales tax on your landline at home. If you have cable TV, you have cable TV?
Of course.
Do you have HBO?
No.
Well, if you had any premium channels, HBO or Major League Baseball, you pay sales tax on the premium channels, but you don't pay sales tax on the basic cable. Candy and gum are considered food and exempt from the sales tax. Well, candy and gum
you're
aren't
saying
food.
is...
Well, let me give you another example. 2 years ago, the Republicans added an exemption on gold bullion. Why should the purchase of gold bullion be exempt from the sales tax?
On that one, I have no answer.
There's no answer for so many of these things.
It
makes no sense. Legal services aren't subject to the sales tax.
You'll get all the trial lawyers.
But I don't care. It's time to say to the special interests, we have to take care of the needs of our people.
So what you're saying
is we can do this.
You could just add things that aren't covered now. Leave food and clothing. Nobody's
touching food and clothing. Legitimate
food.
I don't consider candy and gum legitimate food.
And given the obesity discussion,
absolutely.
All right. Well, let's. What do you? Here's what it comes down to for me as an observer and someone who's written a good bit about this. Eventually, you have to get some agreement. I mean, you cannot. I mean, eventually there are now we're hearing daycare centers, alcohol and rehab, county governments, government. When is the critical mass reached, in your opinion?
The disappointing thing for me is I think we've reached critical mass. We've got to head off those different agencies, nonprofits, and governments from having the problems that they're having. And the conference committee hasn't met in 2 weeks, and that's the committee that's charged with trying to bring this together.
But that's not going to be.
But I think the conference committee. Sure, I think the conference committee, the Republicans, should be forced to say, here's why we want to cut this program. Because, Terry, it's easy to say, no new taxes, all we want to do is cut the budget. Well, people agree with that. But then when they hear $1 billion from public education, that's a cut. They say, well, I'm not so sure. 12,000 kids losing health care? Well, I'm not so sure about that. Seniors taking off long-term living assistance? I'm not so sure. So let them explain the cuts. Let's get the conference committee back to work. You know, this past week, the week before, legislature went out on Thursday, didn't return till Wednesday. On Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, I was the only elected official in Harrisburg for all that time.
Governor Rendell's in Harrisburg now. He's staying here. I think you're stuck here for a while.
I've been here 40 straight days.
40 straight days. All right, we'll be back for the final segment after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Penn Future, where we believe that every environmental victory grows the economy. And by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
I welcome back for the final segment with the Governor of Pennsylvania, Edward G. Rendell. Governor, let me go to one more budget question. If we have time, I want to ask you about your memoir. I want to. No, you're going to get on the record here. It may well be, I don't think it'll see the light of day, that the House Republican Appropriation Chair is going to bring back a budget that the Blue Dog Democrats, conservative Democrats, had to say they'll give you $154 million in education. What are you going to do with that?
Well, first of all, I'd have to look at everything.
Probably not.
But I've said I'm not going lower than 300. Remember, my original proposal was to increase by 418, which was consistent, Terry, with the legislature's costing out study that they did. I'm just implementing their own study. I reduced that 418 to 300. I'm not going any further.
Okay.
Do people grasp the significance of that report? #1 state in the union in student achievement over the last 6 years. That didn't happen by accident. It happened because we made targeted investments in pre-kindergarten, full-day kindergarten, smaller class sizes, laptop computers in every high school desk. Those are the things that have driven education forward, and we're not going back.
Let me ask you one of the things, and let me get you on a record for this about this income tax now. They say, the Republicans say, and we're going to try to get a Republican leader on next week, they say that you won't give up the ghost on the state income tax.
I have.
You have. On the record, you have.
2 weeks ago, I said I'm withdrawing the PIT as a revenue source.
So I don't want to hear anyone say that anymore.
And I've asked them to do two things. Give me a budget that makes no further cuts in education and health care, and give me a budget that has enough recurring revenues that we balance not only this year, but next year. If they do that, Terry, I will sign it regardless of what the plan is.
Governor, I think the real I'm telling you, in my humble judgment, the problem is next year if these revenues don't go up.
Absolutely.
Unemployment is likely to rise and not go down, although maybe the recession has bottomed out. There's a big debate on that.
Unfortunately, we've done better in Pennsylvania than the nation.
Lower than the... but do you agree that it's likely that the budget situation, conceivably, I'm not saying...
Could be a lot worse.
Could be worse. All right.
Unless we cure it this year by doing... Sometimes you have to do unpopular things in politics.
All right, before we go, you're writing a memoir. What's that all about? Come on,
I'm
tell
trying
us
to
about
write
that.
it's about my whole career in politics, starting with when I ran for DA as an insurgent against the Rizzo machine, mayor, governor, my time as Democratic National Committee chairman. And I'm trying to write
this problem you had with Al Gore? You're going to tell that story?
All those stories.
That's going to be
and I'm
great.
trying to tell funny stories and use the humor to teach a little bit. So, for example, there's a section on regulation. I'm sitting in a meeting in Washington with DEP folks and NOAA folks, and we're talking about dredging, and they say, oh, we can't dredge because we have a school of sturgeon in the Delaware River now. And I said, how long have they been there? And they said, 4 years. And I said, well, we dredge every year. The sturgeon must like the dredging. So I wrote on a piece of paper, like a sturgeon, like the Madonna song.
Oh, I like that. All right, thanks, Governor, as always, for coming in.
My pleasure.
Stay here until we get off.
Sure.
We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well. Stay good.